Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT and SAT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT. A full textbook, tons of questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we have Hamada from Right Track Admissions. Really excited to have him on the show. Hamada, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself and your company and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Thanks, Tyler, for having me. So again, my name is Hamada. I'm the founder and CEO of Right Track Admissions, a global admissions consulting company. We're based out of California, but we're really agnostic to where our clients are from. They could be from East Coast, West Coast, or anywhere globally. And we focus on college and graduate school admissions, really with a hyper focus on the story crafting, storytelling process, and really the whole process all around that, kind of the landscape, the ecosystem of college admissions.
Yeah, fantastic. And really just excited for today's episode is just a deep dive on basically not just building a college list, but like what are the selection factors and how you should be evaluating colleges. Because I feel like in the past we've had people on and we've talked about building a college list kind of like from like a high level. I'm excited to kind of get into the details here with you.
Fantastic.
So let's to start things off. I mean, I think it's important to just start with kind of like why this stuff is important, right? I mean, yeah, it's kind of maybe a facetious question because obviously where you go to college is important. It's 4 years of your life, but I think it's also going to be helpful for you to kind of enumerate like why it's important in the sense of like what you're looking at, like how you're thinking about the process, why it's important to take the process seriously.
I mean, it's a great question, and I'm glad we're starting with that. And I think it's really something that you want to be thinking about, not just a month before you apply, but you want to be thinking about this. It could be, 6 months, even a year, 2 years. And I think it's important for parents and the students to have a general idea from what are they looking for in terms of a college education. So let's go macro, right? And then
Mhm.
selecting the right school really is a process of elimination down to your core schools, and then diversifying it, which I hope we have an opportunity to talk about towards the end of this
Mhm.
podcast. But from a selection process, why is it important to figure out the right school? The reality is about a third of college students drop out of college. And the reasons they drop out really comes down to rising costs, which, are going to be important in terms of picking the right school, right? Because one of the factors is going to be financial aid and picking a school
Right.
that's affordable. And that happened to me. I had an option between USC as an undergraduate and UCSB. And I went with UCSB because it was about a third of the price because I was a California resident. So that was part of my decision-making factor.
Mhm.
There is mental health issues that trip up students when they start, because I think a lot of them end up going to the wrong school, which really sets them back. They don't have the right community, the right support.
Mhm.
They don't feel that the school is the right fit for them because they just jumped the gun and they picked the wrong school, and so it can affect their mental health, and so they drop out. There's obviously those that have changing life circumstances, and they just don't feel like there's a right fit in education. But I have to say, even for the last one, if they say, you know what, college is not right for me, I think if you go to the right college, you would probably say, you know what, I'm ready to actually make college work for me, even if you didn't think it was the right
Mhm.
fit during the time. So I think it could be used as a, how do I say, as a crutch by saying college is not for me, while in reality, that college was not right for them. Um, and I have to say that the right college helps you perform better in school, makes you feel more supported. Your mental health improves, which means your grades improve, which means you could potentially apply for more financial aid because you're an honor student, which would lower the cost. So a lot of those factors that I just mentioned can actually be mitigated if in fact you go to the right college. So that's why I put a lot of emphasis in our mastery guide, which we were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
Tyler. I put a whole chapter about how to select the right school and go from the macro to the micro.
Right. Yeah, and I think that I mean, that's basically like the great segue into the next question I had, right? Which is so okay. If you're starting like going from macro to micro totally makes sense. And I'd love for you to walk us through that. But first, you need to be thinking about like what is your macro comprised of and why.
Right.
right? So how do you kind of establish your priorities, and what are kind of some of the categories of priorities that people should be thinking about?
So some of the factors that you want to go into your college education, obviously, let's go macro. Like, why are you going to college? What are the goals that you're trying to achieve? And some quick things that you're thinking of as well, and you may not be thinking of it actively, but it's personal growth, right? It's fine tuning an area of interest of yours that you could really develop through your major, minor, other courses that you take. It's also developing leadership skills. It's developing teamworking skills. It's creating contacts and networks, right? And all of those things are going to help you. Now, let's be realistic. A 16, 17, 18-year-old may not be thinking about all those factors today, but they will be applicable to them in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And they're like, wow, I'm glad I chose where I chose to go to school. So I think these are the macro, bigger factors. As you dissect that, it breaks down to several key factors. I want to kind of run through that list with you, Tyler, if you don't mind. And I think that will help people better understand, okay, so when I'm looking at schools, what should I be kind of thinking about in terms of different factors? And there's a lot of websites, a lot of people speaking about it out there. It's not going to be new. You're not going to be blown away by what I'm going to say, but at least it kind of, puts it all together nice and neat in a bow tie for you to be thinking about. And this is not in a particular order. For first, you want to think about size of the school, right? So there's the schools like your Texas A&M, 50,000 students, Tyler. It's crazy, right? You've got your tiny schools, kind of like your Swarthmores, your Williams College, which has about 1,000, 2,000. Those are your liberal arts. And again, on the opposite side is your major state universities like Texas A&M. And then you've got your mid-range sizes like MITs and so forth, which are about like 10,000, right? So where do you fit? Do you want to have a higher student to faculty ratio? Do you want to have smaller class sizes, or do you want to have a huge campus community, which comes with all those additional resources, right? Then there's going to be the location, right? During COVID, that was a big deal. People are like, no, I actually want to be closer to home. In terms of the climate, do you want to be in a colder environment, a warmer environment, right? As I told you, I chose California for my universities because I wanted to be in a warmer environment. 4 years is a long time. So you want to be in a place that makes sense. Think about urban versus rural, right? So NYU versus Cornell, right? Ithaca versus downtown New York. All those factors go into the location. Then, of course, there's the classics. There's your reputation and ranking, which was a big factor for me.
Yeah.
So that, and that's why I ended up transferring from UCSB to UCLA, because again, I kept wanting to go to schools that were in the higher ranked. And so you want to think about that. It shouldn't be necessarily determinative, but there is a correlation between rank and the quality of the education that you receive. I hate to say it, but in some cases, because of the rank and they're high, that means they're getting more funding, that they're getting more, how do I say it? Donations, which means that they could get better professors, which means that they could get more resources. So that fits into it. And obviously within that, another factor is faculty and resources, right? The more the school has money, kind of like Harvard has like I think a $30 billion endowment. Maybe I'm getting that number wrong, but a supremely high endowment, which means that they can poach the best faculty from around the world, right? And then that fits into tuition and financial aid. Schools like Princeton, I believe, give free tuition to all college students. Harvard does a lot of that. A lot of these top tier schools are doing that, right? So financial aid plays a role into it. Obviously, if you go to a state school, it's cheaper than if you go to a private school or even liberal arts and so forth. The campus vibe, that's a hard one to nail because it's really kind of, it's your gut feeling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, so you've touched on, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your list, but you touched on a couple of things that I feel like are important.
Yeah.
So like location to me, the thing that is important to remember is that oftentimes, it'll be easier to get a job out of college with a local company from whatever university you're at, right? So like you should hopefully be going to college somewhere that you want to work or that you could work, right? And particularly, this isn't like an ironclad rule, but it's one that can be helpful, particularly for like sort of the more technical schools and things like that. And then the second bit I just wanted to jump on also was talking about tuition and financial aid. Something that surprised me was that like a substantial portion of people don't pay full price for college tuition. Like it's like almost half or maybe more than half. So it's worth thinking about the financial aid thing almost as a game that you're trying to like maximize the outcome of. I think a lot of like, at least for me, and maybe I was naive, but when I was applying to college, I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm not going to let financial aid dictate where I go or not. I will want to go to the best school. But in reality, like, I was lucky that that worked out for me, but that doesn't always work out for everybody, right? So it's important to like plan ahead for that. And then talking about the vibe, I mean, I feel like campus visits are important for that. That's something we were going to cover later. Or you could, quickly touch on like ways to screen for vibe now. Do you also feel like there's, social or some like social media accounts or some other way to do that?
Yeah, and so let me quickly just touch on some of the questions, some of the points that you mentioned, and I want to follow up with that
Mhm.
financial aid. I always tell, as a rule of thumb, Tyler, I, like you, very much would rather pick a top tier school with less financial aid than a lower ranked school that just throws money at you because A, it's lower ranked, so it's maybe like more cost effective, and they've got more money
Mhm.
because they really want to attract someone of your caliber. So I, for example, as I said, went to UCSB, then transferred to UCLA, went to a state school. It was cheaper. But I always say in my last year, because I had done exceedingly well in college, I was able to go to the
Mhm.
honors program and just say, hey, listen, guys, I got a great GPA. Is there any way I can get financial aid? Extra financial aid. And they gave me a whole list of scholarships, and I applied to 3, 4, and I got like 2 of them or something. And I had more money
Right.
than what they call cost of attendance. Point is, what you enter in is not necessarily set in stone. A, you could lose your scholarship and financial aid if you perform poorly. But if you perform well and you had nothing going in, right? But if you perform well in college, you could get financial aid in college. So you can go to that school that didn't give you anything, and then you end up graduating debt free, which is what I was able to do. So it definitely is not set in stone, and it is a moving target. And the better you perform in school, the higher chances you're going to get more financial aid. Now, let me touch on the campus vibe. You're 100% right. Going there in person is the best way by far, right? Number one. But there's people that can't do that, right? They can't afford to go and do that. It's too far for them and so forth. So you get campus vibe from different mechanisms that you could do remotely, such as
Mhm.
virtual tours, connecting with a student, alumni, right?
Right.
Trying to see if they have any kind of remote classes that you can like audit. So if they've got a class, you can be like, listen, to the admissions office, I'd like to just check out this class. Are you guys recording it? Yes, we are. Then they can kind of like tune in and see how that looks, right? They could also check
Mhm.
out, like you said, the social media accounts. There's their Instagram accounts,
You
their
could also
LinkedIn.
maybe see like what types of clubs there are, right? Because I think a school that has like, I don't know, an anime club is very different from a school that doesn't
Yeah,
in a lot of vibe ways, for
yeah.
better or
Look,
for worse.
and another one is, in addition to like really kind of hyper focused clubs, having a great sports team and sports program also kind of changes the dynamic of the school, right? So again, at
Right.
UCSB, their sports wasn't like their biggest thing, even though obviously they had sports. But when you get to UCLA, I mean, people swear by the basketball team, by the football team. And so it carries the vibe of the school as well. Also, the Greek system.
Right.
If they have a big Greek system, UCSB had a big Greek system. So that also changes a little bit of the vibe of the school. So there's ways to screen for that remotely if you don't have a chance to go in person, but in person is the best way.
Very
Um,
cool.
Let me quickly go through a couple of the last factors that you want to think about. Think about the network. In addition
Hmm.
to the campus vibe, you want to think about the network of the students in terms of like, where is it? And it goes actually, excuse me, Tyler, you mentioned this is actually a perfect segue. You said there is a bit of a rule of thumb. Now, you went to Carnegie Mellon, right? And remind me again,
Hmm.
that's in Pennsylvania, correct?
Pittsburgh, yeah. And
Pittsburgh,
if
right? Okay.
you if you were applying to jobs in Pittsburgh, they'd love to talk to you. Right? Like I think a lot of Carnegie Mellon people went into tech, so they ended up in San Francisco Bay Area or New York or LA.
Right.
And I think generally speaking, my like a lot of experiences I've seen other people have, particularly people that are maybe not like, that are working in an industry that's not like tech, where it's really only in like a city or two, right?
Right.
Like if you're that your college is going to have the most clout in your local area, So it'll
Yes.
be the easiest to get a job in your local area. And
Right.
also the other aspect, which I think is part of the network thing that you're about to talk about, is that you probably have alumni from your college that work at local companies.
Exactly. Exactly. But here's the kicker. I 100% agree with you. So you don't live in Pittsburgh, right?
No, not anymore.
Exactly. And when you factored that decision, you knew likely you were going to Carnegie Mellon because it's one of the top tech schools and a super highly ranked. So you know that a lot of companies are going to be agnostic to the fact that that you were not going to be based in Pittsburgh, but that you're going to go nationally. And that's part of the decision factor, is to go to a higher ranked school, right? Like go to UCLA, you could still get a job with a UCLA degree outside of Los Angeles, outside of California, in New York. But if you go to a school like maybe Vanderbilt, great school, super focused on Tennessee, right? But still has a good reputation across the board. Rice, Emory, super small, states that you think they're really state located, but they have that reputation. You go to a school like maybe Southern Methodist out in Texas, maybe somebody in California is going to be like, I don't know what that is. I'm going to give somebody from UCLA or, UC Irvine priority over somebody from Southern Methodist because I don't know students from there. And it goes back to the alumni. So if you know that you're going to stick around in Dallas, Houston, in Austin, you may want to go to a state school in Texas and focus there. What do we know, Tyler? Is that we're so freaking mobile. Millennials, Gen Z, Gen X are so mobile that you have no idea if you're going to stick around in your neighborhood, unlike our parents, and we're going to be going somewhere else. So that's why the higher ranked school is, to me, mission critical, or a school that really is great in a specific area of your major, because that's going to play a role more so than trying to go to school where you're going to tap into the alumni of that local community versus going to a school that's got such a great network nationally, regionally, maybe even internationally, if that's where you want to go.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I also think the other thing too is you touched on it just now, having a deep network in a particular field, right? Like I'm imagining Texas Tech probably has a great network in oil and gas industries, if that's something you want to do, right? Like things like that, I think also is another consideration too.
Exactly. And again, I have to keep giving you this caveat. We're not even in, Tyler, what you studied, what I studied, I'm a lawyer. You studied at Carnegie Mellon, but we're both entrepreneurs. We're both in the academic space. Rewind the clock back to when we went to college. We never probably expected ourselves to be where we are, right? So even if you hyper focus on a certain area, unless you're going to medical school or something, chances are you may even change your career. So even if you're hyper focused, you may get out of that rhythm and go somewhere else. So think about that, is that we are in such a malleable world that we don't even know where we're going to live or what field we're going to cover. So don't hyper focus on a school that just focuses on one area, because we don't even know if you're going to change that. But that also plays a role into the academic programs. Imagine you really wanted to be in, like UCLA does not have a strong business school for undergraduates. It's got an economics program, it's got an accounting program, but unlike USC, it doesn't have an international business program, to my knowledge, unless that changed this year. But they've got a great business school, Anderson. So maybe people would be like, no, I'm not going to go to UCLA. I'm going to go to USC because it's got an international business program than UCLA. And that may factor into your decision-making process. And then finally, I'll add to that and kind of roll off of factors is the career development office. Like, do you want to go to a school that has good support services and resources, including a career development office that will help place you in terms of job placements, job opportunities? Are you going to go to a school that has a lot of recruitment there, right? Because if you go to a lower tier school in the middle of, like, I don't know, just nowhere, Nebraska, maybe some of the top companies are not going to go all the way out there to recruit students. So you want to be thinking about recruitment and how much the Career Center actually places people, how much they make, how much students make after they graduate. All these are going to be parts of the many factors that you're going to be thinking about for school selection.
Yeah. And how do you get that information? Do you just reach out to the career services office and ask, or do you try to look it up online maybe?
To be honest, it's a great question, and I think you can hit it from three ways. One, if you ever get interviewed by that school, and we can talk about this on maybe in another podcast. But there's a whole world of college interviews, and you want to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions in an interview is super important. That's a great question to ask. is asking them like, what are the percentages of students getting jobs and being recruited from your school, right? Because that would factor into my decision. That's the question you would ask the interviewer, right? So that's one way, is asking the interviewer if you get interviewed. Another way, obviously, is going to their school website and going to the Career Center website of that school and seeing if that information is readily available. And the third way, obviously, is literally calling the Career Development Office, say, I'm applying to your school, but sell me. What are the statistics of recruitment? And they got to do it. Look, they want your money as much as you want their education. So at the end of the day, these are great questions to ask. And you can reference that in the why school essay and say, having spoken to Bob at the Career Development Office, I saw how much effort is put into student recruitment and helping students get jobs afterwards, which is one of the factors that, is very much a pull factor for me to come to your school.
Right. Yeah, I think that's all super important. And I think also just like having the attitude of like, I think so many people when they're applying to college are kind of like, please pick me. Right. But you're also making a purchase. Like you're actually like that shouldn't be so powerless, right? Like you should be thinking about how what you want and trying to be like pushing back a little bit or seeking that out.
Yeah,
Rather
you're
than just
interviewing
kind of
them like
being
they're interviewing you, Taylor. That's exactly what you're doing. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, precisely. Well, yeah. So then now that we've kind of got like what are the different priorities? I mean, how do you keep track of all this as you're going through and doing your research? And I'd love to walk through the research process.
Sure. So, I gave you guys a list of like a series of maybe 8, 10 factors, right? And exactly, actually, you just alluded to it, Taylor, is prioritize them and what matters to you more. You may say, I want to prioritize a school that's really hyper-focused on DEI, right? So diversity is critical for me. I want to go to a school. I feel welcome. I feel safe, right? You could be, of a certain identity group that you just feel like that's very important for you to kind of, how do I say, build, nurture, grow. And so you want to go to school that's more important to you than rank. Some people are going to be wanting to go to school that's going to be more affordable than rank. Some people are going to want to, so prioritize those for you. Once you've prioritized it, I want you to kind of create what we call a college tracker. And I actually share this link with you. Let's give it to you guys for free. That you guys can use. Very basic, bare bones. I'm not going to give you something uber sexy. It's not going to be something like, an app, but it is a Google spreadsheet so that it's in the cloud, so that's dynamic. You can edit it on your phone, on any computer. You can share it with your parents. You can share it with your friends so other people can see it and edit it. And it basically has a series of columns. And those series of columns are kind of divided up into those areas that we just talked about, those priority areas that I just mentioned. And I'll just kind of, you want to have like the first column has the name and the location of the school. The second column has where you prioritized it. And we'll talk a little bit about that, what we call reach, target, and safety schools, and where that school kind of fits into it. Then you have like the academic requirements. Well, it requires GPA of X. If it's still applicable, if the school is test optional, maybe it's X SAT score, maybe it's X TOEFL score, whatever it is. Then you have a column that's the application requirement. Guys, this is super important that you have a place on your spreadsheet that tells you the application requirements for a couple of reasons. And in the application requirements, I want you to be thinking about the essays, the prompts, the number of words, right? As well as the number of letters of recommendation, as well as the length of the resume and any other requirements. And the reason it's important is it helps you keep track of what you have to create, so you don't lose track of it. Because it sucks if you actually submit an application, you completely drew a blank on this one requirement and you submitted an incomplete application. And trust me, the schools don't have an obligation to contact you and say, hey, can you complete your application? They've got thousands of applicants, so they're not going to bother. And then you're going to come back in 5 months and be like, why did I get rejected? Oh, well, the reason you got rejected is because you didn't even have a complete application, and you're going to bang your head against the wall. The second reason is because you may write an essay. I'll give an example. I have it up right here in front of me. we'd like to know a little bit more about you. Please respond to one of the following questions. It's cool to love learning. What excites you about intellectual curiosity? Where are you on your journey of engaging with the fighting for social justice, right? So these are some questions that Tufts asks you. Well, guess what? Lo and behold, you're reading through it, and I mean, I'm just pulling this out of nowhere. Maybe MIT asks the same question. Maybe Carnegie Mellon asks the same question, right? So now you know that one essay you can repurpose for several schools. And if you had all the requirements of all the schools in front of you on a spreadsheet, you can start creating a material, an arsenal of essays that you can then repurpose and retool for different schools, right? And tweak them without getting lost and recreating the wheel every time. And then finally, the last couple of columns you want to have is why that school. So, using me, UCLA, I wanted to be closer to family in a big metropolitan city, in a highly ranked school that was affordable, that had a good history major, what I was studying. So Those are your reasons. You put that into that column, and then you can quick reference them as you go through the process. The costs, the deadlines, the status of the submission, submitted, on the way, still have to collect this document. And finally, any notes you have. Went to Carnegie Mellon, met with Tyler, had a really great conversation, right? Put that in the notes. And then you could use that in the why essay. You can use that in the interview. You can use that in the essays, right? That's what I want you to have, this kind of dynamic document that you can then use for all the schools to kind of keep track of everything. And then please plug in the deadlines in a calendar, because that spreadsheet's not going to give you alerts if you're running out of, if you're coming too close to it. But if you've got 2 weeks to submission, and really this matters, guys, if you're applying EA, ED, right? Early action, early decision, part 2, there's 2 types of early decisions: restrictive early action, rolling decision, but, applying, regular decision, but applying on the rolling admission cycle. So trying to apply early. Get those deadlines in your calendar so that they alert you 2 weeks in advance, 1 week in advance, and the day of the deadline. So you don't miss any deadlines, especially for those who are applying early.
Yeah, no, that all makes a ton of sense. And I think another tip that'll probably be helpful is to share that calendar, probably both with your parents and with if you have somebody like Right Track Admissions or another counselor that you're working with.
Right.
You can, at least in Google Calendar, which is what I use, you can create like a separate calendar. You can title it, college admissions deadlines, and then you can share just that calendar and not your whole calendar. With your parents and things like that. You want everybody kind of to get on the same page. And I really like your idea of like taking the essay prompts and trying to like figure out where the cross sections are.
Yep.
So that you have to write less essays overall. I think a little bit of prep here can save you a lot of work in the future.
Yeah, 100%. And we've done this with our clients to save them money. Because I'm going to be like, guys, there's no reason to apply 10 schools with us. Apply to 4, 5, 6. With those 6 schools, we're going to create 15 unique essays. And those 15 unique essays for those 6 schools are going to help you apply to another 6 or 7 schools on your own, because we've already created the tools that you need to retweak them for the other schools without you having to involve us. And that will save your parents money.
Right. Yeah. Well, and as a parent, I bet you like to save money. Cool. Well, then let's talk about how to do the research portion, right? So you've got your spreadsheet, let's say. You talked about macro to micro at the beginning of the call, and I'm curious what that means to you and kind of how that is the baseline or the starting point for your process.
Yeah. So look, there's so much out there in terms of how to find information about the schools. So what I like to do is I like to start with just to get a sense of what's out there. I start usually with U.S. News World Report. We know that U.S. News Report is one of the more, well-recognized ranking, but it's also taken a hit because some schools have felt that ranking is too subjective. It's not backed by certain numerical factual information. So some schools have withdrawn their own school from that ranking, refused to partake in it. But that I think is more for law school.
I think it's still definitely like for me, it's sort of still the number one only game in town when it comes to rankings.
I agree. There was Vault had at some point a publication. There's a couple other schools that have it. I think I'm Barron's, I think, but these are old school. So I usually like US News World Report. I would even pay a little bit extra for the subscription so that you can kind of dig into the finite information and start with that, right? Because you'll start with, let's say, geography. Then you'll go into kind of like rankings, and then you're going to try to find some intersectionality and then say, okay, I know I want to be in California. I know I want to be on the East Coast. So East versus West, or I'll start my search on the East Coast. I know I want to go to the main cities. So you got Boston, DC, Chicago, New York, right? We go for those 4 big. Then I'm going to start searching schools that are in those cities that are ranked within the top 50, 60. So now you've boiled down that. So that's where I would start, was US News, and start creating a longer list. I'm not going to call it a short list, but a longer list, right? Now that you've got a longer list, let's dig a little deeper. And that's where you start going to the individual school websites and poke around there, but have like a method to the madness. What are you looking for? Right? So maybe you go to the department of the major you're interested in. Maybe you go to their sports programs. Maybe go into their latest news, right? So you go into their journals, their newspapers. Things are coming up, so start searching for those kind of factors, and then use the website to fill in the information from the factors that we had just mentioned. Also jump to social media. People neglect it, but you've got their Instagram accounts, you've got their LinkedIn accounts, you've got, I think you've got, I don't want to sound dated. I doubt you can. I don't even know if schools have their TikTok accounts, but at least through Instagram. Oh, excuse me, Twitter is what I was thinking of. Even though now we've got Threads coming out of left field, so you've got these, you've got all these social media accounts. Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, I think, are going to be your 3 big ones for schools. Take a look at them. They're going to feature students, athletes, faculty, latest news. And that's going to really kind of give you that kind of real-time, up-to-date information. Then you can go check out, now that you've kind of got that information, then I would go check out like student reviews. I don't know if you've checked this out, Tyler, but College Confidential or Niche or Unigo. I don't
cool.
swear.
I actually, those are all great recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't swear by them because a lot of people can obviously put whatever they feel that may have impacted their experience. But I think it's good to poke around and just check out what those websites are saying, or other blogs out there. Or even, by the way, YouTube is another one, because you can go to YouTube and see what people are saying about that university, and like they're doing their own tours. Now that I think about it, attend the college fairs, info sessions that they may have. Get the people's names, please, because you're going to reference that in the Y School essay. Go to your counselors, your high school counselors, if they're overwhelmed. This is a crazy fact, Tyler, if you knew this: 480 students per high school counselor in America. It's nuts. So that's
they are barely able to help even like one person, almost, it seems.
Exactly, which is, again, where we found this void and why we created the Right Track. But your mentors who may know about the schools, talk to current students, talk to alumni of that school. That's huge. Get their names. I talked about, virtual tours, if they have those. And since COVID, a lot of those schools also have that as an option. And then we talked about the campus visits. So you can see, you start from the macro of let's figure out what schools are out there, all the way down to let's figure out what happened yesterday on campus that could be interesting for me to know.
Got it. Yeah, that all makes sense. And then as you're going through this, I mean, you talked a little bit about this earlier, right? But you're kind of trying to like get a little bit of a social vibe and social network going with the people that are there, right? So you mentioned, I really like this tip: write the names down of all the people that you met, and make sure that you can reference them in like your essay, right?
Yep.
And I also think then, that kind of leads to just like something that I think we want to talk about a little bit, which is just like making the most of that campus visit. Like, is there any other tips you have in that regard?
Yeah, look, there's some good companies out there that do some of this stuff. I know that we had worked with in the past with College Scoops, which creates guidebooks, and then also to help parents kind of figure out what they should do on campus. But here's a couple of quick tips. So when you get to campus, guys, first thing you want to do just to acclimate is get an official tour. And I like these official tours because they're usually done by students. I used to see them all the time. I don't know about you, Tyler, when you were out there in college, but you see these guys wearing those hats and they're running around campus with a whole like in tow with the parents and the students. Everybody's like wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and this person's dropping knowledge and cracking jokes and giving stats and stuff like that. So that official tour will take you through campus buildings, residence halls, recreation facilities, cafeterias, right? So they'll show you a nice behind the scenes. So you get a good session, you get a good idea. Then if they have an info session on campus, do that as well. Again, so that you hear straight from the horse's mouth, because typically those info sessions are done by the admissions office, right? So you can figure out what they're looking for. If you've got an opportunity and you can schedule it, meet with faculty, right? Or audit a class. Go check out a class. You went and saw Sociology 101. You can mention that in your essay. Having attended and audited Sociology 101, where I saw the dynamic of the students and the interactions and the way that the pedagogy of the class really excited me and I wanted to be part of that community, right? You could literally mention that stuff in your essays. Check out the facilities, the libraries, walk through them, the research centers, the sports, like where the gym is. And then if you have the opportunity, obviously talk to the current students. And like we just said, get their names. Figure out when they're going to graduate. Because in the essay, you can say, having spoken to Bob Smith, class of 2026, he mentioned how great the student to faculty ratio is and how much he's learning from that experience. Great. Mention it. Two other quick factors that people sometimes neglect. Get out of the school, right? You are in Pittsburgh, Tyler. Pittsburgh's a big city and it's got its own crazy vibe, right? So that's a big factor. You want to go into Pittsburgh and you're going to be spending time there, right? I started in UCSB, so I wanted to check out what Santa Barbara or Goleta were all about. I went to UCLA, so I want to know what Westwood is about, or LA. So you want to check out what the community is all about, the city, right? And then if the campus has any events, like any sporting events, performances, guest lectures, take advantage of that. Go to those, because then you can see how the students interact and ask questions and things like that. So that's, I think, how you can do it. And my pro tip to you is take notes, take pictures, take video. If you're going to go to 10 schools on this crazy school, journey, and a lot of parents do this with their kids in the summer before they apply, the kids are going to forget. Trust me. They're going to forget what the hell is going on from one school to the next school. So if you have like a folder on Google Drive or something where you drop those pictures in, the videos in, take copious notes on like a Google document, and then when it comes time to actually not only write about why the school, Tyler, but choosing the school. You may have 4 schools to choose from, and then you're going to be like, wow, I completely forgot what the vibe on NYU was like. Go back to your pictures, go back to your videos, go back to your notes. And that will help you make that decision when you've got a couple of schools to choose from.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. And I think that also is like a really nice setup for the next thing we're going to talk about, right? Which is, what's the purpose of all this? It's to help you narrow down your list.
Right.
Like, you started with your big list, right? And
Right.
I'm sure that, everyone's list is going to be different. But basically, no matter how you started your list, you should try to end your list with, max 10, right? But probably more
Right.
like 5 schools.
Right.
And I mean, I'm curious that's just my opinion, right? So I'm curious what
Right.
you think as far as total number, and also, just like how you walk people through like narrowing down the list.
So now, exactly to your point, now that we've gone through all the factors, we've told you how to make the research. Now you're like, Mom, Dad, I've got a list of 15. Now, some high schools will limit the number of schools you can actually apply to. They'll actually put a cap on it. Others may not. But I actually err on the side of push it to more schools than less, because in the end of the day, you want to have the highest chance of admission and the highest chance of getting admitted to several schools where you can then negotiate, or like what you want to call reconsideration, financial aid packages. I think we mentioned that, Tyler, in the beginning, right? Where you can actually talk from one school to the next and say, listen, I got into NYU, but I really want to go to your school, Columbia. Can you, sweeten the pot and give me something like what Columbia is giving me or NYU is giving me, right? So
Right.
The way I try to divide it up is think about schools and think about it in a bell curve. So on one end of the bell curve is the reach schools. On the middle of the bell curve is the target schools. And on the opposite end of the bell curve is the safety schools. The bulk of your concentration should be targets. And again, using that reach to safety, along the route is what I call high targets or high reaches, mid-tier reaches, and low-tier reaches. High targets, mid targets, low targets, and the same with safeties. What does that look like? In terms of chances of admission, and again, this depends on your profile, your score, all the kind of factors that schools look at. The reach schools are the ones that you have like about a 1% chance of admission. What's that look like? Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, right? Those kind of schools, those Ivy Leagues. 1% chance of admission to about 15. That's your reach schools. And if you're looking at numbers, those really you should be applying anywhere from 1 to 4 reach schools. So that's on that bell curve. Then the bulk of your application should be targets. And that's, you have about a 15 to 40% chance of admission, right? Where like a high target would be 15 to 25, mid target would be 25 to 35, low target would be 35 to 40, right? And of course, this really depends on your own background. What, Tyler, your targets are may be completely different to what my targets are because, you know, SATs are different or GPA is different or your profile is different.
Right.
So when doing that, again, think about your bell curve. That's where you want to have the bulk of the schools you're applying to. So anywhere from 4 to 8 target schools, right? And that should be the focus. The reaches are the moonshots. The targets are attainable, right? But you got to work hard to get them. And then you've got your safeties, which is the opposite of the bell curve. And that's where you've got a 40+% chance of admission, 40 to, I don't know, let's say 90 chance of admission. But my little pro tip on that is don't apply to a bunch of schools that you would never want to go see yourself going to. Because otherwise, what was the point of spending that money and time? So you want to go to schools that you still feel like, yeah, I guess if push came to shove, I would go to that school. Again, those are your safety schools. And those should be anywhere from 1 to 4 safety schools. And you should have some just in case to hedge. Though you may come back and say, you know what? If I had to end up going to a safety, I'd rather go to community college, save a hell of a lot of money, and then get into a better ranked school as a community college student, which is very fair. It will save you money. It will allow you to check out a bunch of different fields so you can then figure out what your best major is. And it may be better than going to a safety. But you may say, no, I don't want to go to community college. Or your parents say, no, they would much rather have you go to a safety school and just go through that. Guys, I wouldn't call UCSB a safety school, but I did transfer from UCSB to UCLA. It's hard to transfer from a 4-year to 4-year, but it's possible. I did, and it could be something that you can consider.
For sure. Yeah. So I mean, building your list and what you've talked us through right now is pretty focused on like the chances of admissions, right? But I also think that, or I'd also be curious to hear about, as you're narrowing down your college list, like how you pull in all the other factors that we talked about earlier in the episode, right? Like the vibe of the campus and things like that. Like, is that just that information's trying to help you narrow down within these segments, or is there anything else that you try to think about?
I think that's a great point. Look, in the end of the day, you know you've got these buckets to fill because that is the reality. It's chances of admission. You don't want to go like, oh, these 10 schools have great vibes. Well, if those 10 schools are all reach schools, then what's the point? You may not get in. So you've got to be realistic and you've got to divide it up in terms of chances of admission. I'm not talking about rank. I'm talking chances of admission. That being said, once you've got, let's say, 6 reach schools, use the factors to narrow those 6 to the 3 that you're going to apply to, right? Where vibe kicks in, where ranking kicks in, where financial aid kicks in, where career development offices kick in, right? So use those as your own silos. You know you want to apply to 1 to 4 reach schools. You know you've got 6 on your list. Use the factors to narrow those 6 down to 3 so that you have a kind of a good medley of schools that factor in what you're looking for and what you've prioritized. But you have to be realistic. There's nothing worse than having a bunch of people apply to Harvard or bust kind of schools and then end up like, wow, I didn't get in anywhere, and get really disappointed.
Right. Well, and also you want to have, on the other side of things, you want to have safeties that you'd actually want to attend, right? So
Exactly.
I think it's a really good way to kind of balance it out.
Yep.
Well, great. I mean, this has all been really helpful. I mean, this basically is going to be like one of our longer episodes. And I think you really helped us walk through the whole selection process and, building a list to narrowing it down and applying. I'm curious if there's anything you kind of wanted to end on or any kind of like concluding or parting thoughts here.
Yeah, look, I mean, let me give you one last parting thought. Hopefully, I'll try to keep this brief, but I would feel remiss if I didn't say it, which is, now that you've got your list, now you've submitted all your applications and everything, now when you're getting admitted, when you get the final results, right? That's also factors into picking the right school, because, you want to be thinking about a whole plethora of things, like how much financial aid did you get? Maybe go back and revisit the campus to make sure that you got the campus makes the most sense, right? And attending like the orientation, because that can also help you narrow that down in terms of the final school selection. And another factor within that is, when you get admitted, and let's say, hopefully you get into like 6, 7, 8 schools, do not accept the first school that accepts you. Unless
Right.
obviously it's ED, then you don't have a choice because it's binding. But if it's EA or regular decision, don't immediately select. Take your time, speak with your parents, talk to your advisors, go check out the campus, go to the admit day, do more info sessions, talk to alumni. A lot of those factors that we talked about in terms of researching, now reverse them and use them for fine tuning and finalizing. So that, again, it's not just picking the schools, it's picking the right school for you. And that's going to come down to that final selection that you'll make around, I don't know, March, April, May, June is kind of where you dig that. And then I guess the final
Right.
point is, it's not set in stone. Even if you go to that school and you're not happy with it, you can still apply to transfer. The only thing they're going to look at is, how well did you do at that school? So you obviously want to do well if you plan to transfer within, a year and a half. If you have crappy grades and you really want to get into a better school, it's not going to happen. So you obviously want to do well, and then you can transfer out. So it's not set in stone. And again, using me as an example, I transferred out after 2 years. I loved my first 2 years of Santa Barbara, but I wanted something different in the end, and I went to UCLA. So it wasn't set in stone, and I was able to transfer. So those are my final 4 tips.
So, and then the last thing, I know that you and I, when we were getting prepared for this, you talked about having a guide that you'd want to share. Do you want to throw out kind of a place to find it, or, like maybe a bit.ly link or a URL placeholder?
Yeah, so I'll put that. We can put that in the show notes at the end. Basically, what we've done is, after 15 years of business, I put together a college admissions mastery guide that really breaks everything into 3 main sections, which is the lay of the land, the application components, and then the final mile. Because it really is a journey that could last 3 months, or it's a journey that could last 3 years, right? Or even more. I mean, you probably, Tyler, know of parents who are working with their kids as early as middle school to start getting them to be the best college applicants possible. So this guide can really help those parents and those students from as early as like freshman, sophomore year, all the way through to school selection and success in college. So I will share with you those links. It's pretty much hot off the press. We finally created after 15 years being in business. And so we are publishing as we speak. And I'll share that information with you. Hopefully your audience will find that useful as well. And it covers a lot of the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And if you're listening to this and you're curious about this guide, check the description notes of this podcast and we'll make sure to include it there.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Hamada from Right Track Admissions. And Achievable has a ACT course that you can get a free trial of by visiting achievable.me. And if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.